Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're discussing the value of hydropower. Since 1923, when TID entered the retail electric business, clean, reliable hydropower has been part of our generation portfolio. Even as electric demand continues to rise and more regulatory constraints have been put on TID's operations, hydropower remains a very valuable resource and may be getting even more valuable. On this episode, I'm joined by TID's Assistant General Manager of Power Supply, Dan Severson, to discuss our hydropower fleet, the role those plants play in our portfolio, and the value hydropower brings to the district. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So you have previously joined us on the podcast before during episode 15 when we were talking about TID's entrance into the energy imbalance market and summer readiness. So we're not quite into our summer readiness time yet, although it feels like it's getting close. But we're excited to have you back to talk about something a little bit different today.
Happy to be here.
All right. So for the listeners who maybe didn't join us for episode 15, let's start with your background. Would you tell us kind of about your time here at the district?
Sure. I had a background in commodity sales. I bought and sold produce as a produce broker, and I'd always had an interest in serving the public, and I'd always been interested in power and keeping the lights on and providing a value for the community. I had been pursuing a position here at the district for some times, and I was fortunate enough to be hired as a trader in 2006. And the great thing about power versus selling a commodity like fruits or vegetables is that it doesn't go stale. It always makes grade, usually makes delivery.
Sure.
We don't have to worry about border crossings and truck strikes and things like that. And so it was refreshing to be able to go to work, trade the power, match up supply with demand, and go home and really not worry about it, and know that the next person was taking care of it.
Sure, absolutely. And an interesting segue though from produce trading to energy trading. I imagine there were a lot of skills that were transferable from one to the next.
Absolutely. So negotiating, bartering, compromising, but there's also the technical market resource and research skills that were needed to diagnose the market. And the best thing about being a trader is that if you think about it, the marginal cost of our units are either in or out of the market at every minute of the day. So I went into the mindset with there's always a trade to be made.
Okay.
Whether you're buying or selling. Now, you may not have room on certain days, or you may have some operational constraints that limit some of the trading activity, but it was real refreshing for me to be able to go into an environment where there was always a trade to be made, because in the produce business, it wasn't always like that.
Sure. Oh, interesting. Okay, so you come on to TID as an energy trader, and where'd you go from there?
So around 2010, the state had really ramped up their environmental laws and regulations, and it was identified that the district needed to develop some expertise in renewables and greenhouse gas. As you're probably well aware, the regulatory mandates, and I think we're going to touch on this later, the regulatory mandates on utilities in both renewables and greenhouse gas were increasing. We needed to get our arms around what it meant for the district and what our obligations were and how we were going to mitigate some of those impacts. And so the district created an analyst position, and I was fortunate enough to get that job and serve in that role for about 4 years. Part of it, really a key part of that position was reporting our greenhouse gas and renewables positions. Really, so at that time, upper management can get an understanding of where we were and where we needed to go. Mm-hmm. After 4 years there, I went into governmental affairs. There a need arose at the district to liaise with legislative and regulatory staff, both in Sacramento and in DC. So some of the regulatory experience that I gained as an analyst following renewables and greenhouse gas really translated to a short stint as a governmental affairs person. I learned a lot.
Okay.
About how laws are made and how those laws turn into regulations and how those regulations turn into obligations on the district. And so it was experience that really helped me grow my career here at TID. After a few years of that, I felt like it was time to get back to what I really was kind of meant to do, and what at my core is I'm a trader at heart. I like to make deals, and an opportunity came in resource planning to take our environmental commodities that I had learned about and started reporting on, and that's renewables, which is renewable energy credits, and greenhouse gas, which are greenhouse gas allowances. The market had developed tradable instruments, and there was a need to understand the market. So I had an opportunity to move back upstairs into the power supply administration and work in resource planning for a few years before transitioning to energy markets department manager. And that was a real opportunity for me, in that it was a chance to manage the area that I grew up in.
Sure.
At the district, the trading and scheduling area. That department also has settlements and Cal ISO relations, and it was another great opportunity for growth for me. And then in 2020, when we had the new management come in and Michelle was appointed GM, I was fortunate enough to be appointed the Assistant General Manager of Power Supply. And so now, very humbled. There's a lot to what we do in power supply. I like to say we generate it, we trade it, we settle it, we plan for it, and we optimize it. And that doesn't encompass everything we do in PSA. We also have a dam safety component, but essentially there's 5 departments that fall under the PSA umbrella, 3 of which fall under a director of generation, and that is the hydroelectric department, which we're going to talk about today, the combustion turbine department, which consists of our thermal fleet, and then a power plant engineering department, which supports both those areas, as well as does the dam safety.
Awesome. Well, it really sounds like you've, as you've said, kind of grew up in just in general, the power area. You started as a trader, you kind of spread your wings and dabbled in a few other areas, but ultimately it pulled you back home to where you're supposed to be. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's been a fun ride and very humbled to have this responsibility and this opportunity.
Very cool. Well, we are super excited to have you sit down with us today and talk through, as you said, just one component of what power supply handles in general, but focusing today on the value of hydropower. So let's jump into it.
Sounds great.
Okay. So as the name implies, hydropower is generating electricity with water. But how does hydropower generation actually work? Can you give us kind of an overview?
Sure. At the highest level, water moves through a turbine, which is a piece of machinery that is made to spin from the velocity that the water creates. That spinning turns a shaft, which will in turn induce electrical current into between a rotor and a stator, and induce electrical current into a generator, which is stepped up to voltages that are ultimately used on the grid for our customers.
Okay. And are there different types of hydropower plants?
There are. So a majority of our hydropower comes from what's called an impoundment type of arrangement where we hold water behind a dam. There is a power tunnel that water is released. There's elevation involved, and it creates what's called a head. And that head, how it is directly proportional, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, to the efficiency and the amount of water that it takes to make 1 megawatt of energy varies by the elevation in the head. And so that's probably the most common form of hydropower.
And so our Don Pedro then would be an example of an impoundment dam.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, and a lot of power around the state of California, a lot of hydropower is of that category.
Okay. Very good.
Another very common type of hydropower is called run-of-river. This is very popular in the Northwest, Midwest, and the East, where there isn't a lot of reservoirs and dams built, where flows are high, coming through some really big rivers. The Columbia River is one of the, and its confluence with the Snake River creates an extremely fast flows, especially in the spring and the summer. But those are rivers that flow all year. And the federal government back in the 30s and 40s built a series of very big hydropower run-of-river assets that it's the same concept where water passes through a facility, spins a turbine, and induces electrical current into a generator. It's a little less controlled because it's a function of really how the river is flowing.
Okay.
And there's usually limited storage on and off stream to manage those fluctuations.
Okay.
And so when the water comes, you generate.
Then okay. So whereas with Don Pedro, we have our reservoir, we store water, and then we release it as we need to and generate from those releases. Run of river is just literally that. It's as the river is running, you're generating power from it.
Correct.
Okay. Any other types of hydropower plants?
Sure. Well, there's pump storage hydro, and there's also what's called micro hydro, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But pump storage is akin to a battery, where if you have a storage facility like Don Pedro, when demand is low, you can pump water up into an upper reservoir when prices are low or demand is low, and then you can release water out of that upper holding pond down through some hydro facilities when demand is high. Those are resources that are really starting to get a lot of attention, and I'll touch on Red Mountain Bar in a little bit. But it is, due to the influx of renewables and the amount of intermittent generation on the grid, pump storage is really matches well with intermittency, and like you said, does serve as a giant kind of a battery. Okay.
So it's essentially creating that hydro opportunity.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So it allows us to arbitrage low and high prices and demand to better suit our customers' demand and market opportunities without really disturbing our river operations.
Okay. Very cool. You've given us a number of teasers here that I'm excited to get into. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the powerhouse at Don Pedro. What role does that particular facility play within our generation portfolio?
We built the Don Pedro powerhouse in 1970, and it was originally 3 55 megawatt units. They're Francis turbines. It's a special kind of design that fit well with the type of facility that we had up there. And then in 1986, we added the 4th unit. We had an opportunity. We had a little bit of space in the powerhouse and at the bottom of the dam to add a 4th unit. And so we have a total installed capacity of 203 megawatts. It's an extremely important part of our portfolio. We have roughly 800 megawatts of of generation capacity in our portfolio today. So Don Pedro serves roughly 1/4 of that. I'd say 25%. There is a split as far as who has rights to that power. Our partners to the north of the river, Modesto Irrigation District, are part owners in the project. TID is the project manager and the operator of the project, and the benefits of the hydropower are split on the original historic split due to the acreage we served at the time, and it's roughly 2/3 TID, 1/3 Modesto.
Sure. Now, hydropower is, as you've mentioned, in your background, you've worked a lot with renewables and have kind of came, through that whole the consciousness of the rise of renewables and greenhouse gases and whatnot as it went through the state of California. And hydro is a renewable resource, or it is not a renewable resource. Can you clarify that for us?
Sure, great question. I think most people that have common sense would consider large hydro, which is categorized as 30 megawatts and above, as renewable.
Makes sense.
Because it comes from rain that's produced by Mother Nature. And so at the onset of the renewable legislation, there was a line drawn in the sand at 30 megawatts. The argument on the environmental side is that units that were bigger than that had more of an impact to the environment because they were usually associated with impoundment dams like what we have at Don Pedro. And some can argue that there was an environmental effect or impact to those larger units, so they weren't considered renewable.
Okay.
Most of the smaller capacity units are tied to either run-of-river facilities that I touched on earlier, or much smaller impoundment storage type facilities that have a lot less environmental footprint.
Okay.
And so that was kind of the dividing, like the bright line between the large hydro and the small hydro. It all counts for carbon free.
Okay.
And we're working through those regulations to get out to 2030 and beyond to 2045. We have to get 60% renewable by 2030. And our Don Pedro facility, because it's over 30 megawatts, doesn't count towards those goals. But it definitely does count towards our carbon-free goals further out the curve towards 2045.
Okay, gotcha. And when you say those goals and those percentages, that's a generation. Our generation has to be 60% renewable by 2030.
Correct. It's not. That's an important delineation. So, the power with which we deliver to our customers, and this is an important point that we try and make with legislators and regulators all the time, is just because we are 60% renewable, that's a procurement target and a procurement mandate. And oftentimes that renewable power that we're buying doesn't match up with our customers' demands. And so oftentimes we'll sell it into the market, and what we actually serve our customers with is either localized generation or tied to market purchases.
Okay. That is a good distinction to make, yeah.
Basically, the renewable mandate, just you can own out-of-state resources like we own Tuolumne Wind Farm. The only requirement is that you deliver it to the state to where it serves California ratepayers.
Okay, very good. So what are some of the other kind of unique features or contributions that the Don Pedro Powerhouse makes to our portfolio?
So one really big advantage to Don Pedro and hydropower assets in general is that they're extremely fast. And so when there is, you can imagine on any given day, there's a whole bunch of variable type demands on the system. On the generation side, you have wind that can do whatever it wants.
Sure.
Solar that can come on and off depending on cloud cover, storms,
sure.
etc. to where those units they go from full output to zero within a matter of seconds.
Sure.
The great thing about hydro is that it's one of the fastest moving ramping, they call it ramping, generation types that exists. And so it really helps to smooth out those demands on our system that fluctuate. Another piece of that is the demands on that our customers have. So people flip switches when they want. They put it into production when they want. Air conditioning load, and as you can imagine, in the summer becomes a little bit of an issue in the demands on our system. But the challenges really are in the spring and the fall, when temperatures are right around that time where we have air conditioning load kind of cutting in and cutting out. We are a summer peaking area here in California. In the Northwest, most of their peaking happens in the wintertime because they have a whole bunch of heating load tied to electric heat pumps, et cetera. And so, so a big advantage to hydro, number one, is the speed. The other advantage to hydro is that it's carbon free. It counts, as I alluded to earlier, towards our carbon free portfolio. And then the dispatchability of hydro too, especially in an impoundment facility like we have at Don Pedro, is a real advantage.
Okay, very cool. No, and that's an interesting point you made, because we always, we often talk. In fact, you've been here on the podcast with us talking about kind of that summer peak and how we prepare for that and how we, plan for it and get through that. But the spring and the fall, when especially even this spring, as we've seen, we have had some days that are 75 degrees. We've had some days that are 55 degrees. And so kind of managing between that would definitely be a hard load to chase, I would imagine.
It can be. And, we're learning all the time about our customers' sensitivity to temperature and the demands on our system. And Don Pedro really helps to serve those demands.
Very good. Okay. All right. So we often refer to Don Pedro as a water first priority. What do we mean by this?
Great question. So we say, when we say water first priority, it means that we don't release water out of Don Pedro Reservoir just to generate electricity. The priority is serving the river demands and the irrigation demands of our customers. And really, over and above that, any water that's released purely for generation purposes is essentially stored in Turlock Lake, or goes to the grid to serve our customers. But we make it releases based on the water need, which I alluded to, irrigation, fish flows, and then at times like this year and last year, flood control purposes, where we're not necessarily making releases to satisfy our environmental requirements or serve an irrigation demand. We're making releases to keep the dam from overflowing and have a potential flood event like we saw in 2017.
Mm-hmm. So fair to say then, the district is always making some kind of a release, whether that's to meet our stewardship obligations on the river or it's for irrigation. But typically, anytime there's water coming through the dam, we're going to send it through the powerhouse and try and capitalize on that.
To the extent that we can, yes, absolutely. That would be the first place we put it through, because that generates electricity. You get that conjunctive use of the water, not only serving irrigation in our river flows, but also generates power to serve our customers. Now, there are times where we can't generate because we're in an outage, or there's plant maintenance that needs to be done, and we try and schedule those outages to times that are outside of our irrigation season, mm-hmm. and that are also that makes sense from from a power demand perspective where demand is low and we can get by without those units. But to the extent our staff does an amazing job keeping those units available when there is fuel available to put through the units, and very proud of the efforts that they've made. A lot of improvements over the years, tweaking our maintenance plan to really maximize availability when the water is there. As you're well aware, over the last 10 to 15 years, the hydrology in our watershed has really changed. And we have an amazing hydrology staff here that has developed some amazing tools that allow us to make decisions earlier than we ever have. And so to the extent that we know what's coming downhill from our watershed, and we can manage the flood control at the dam, it really benefits. And an example of that is January of last year, we had some disruptions in the natural gas market, and not a lot of people are aware, but generally the wholesale market is set from the marginal cost of natural gas, right? So most hydro facilities run the way they run because of the water constraints. Most wind and solar run just as a product of the fuel that's available. And so what fills the gap now, and that's one of the challenges I'll touch on later, is mainly natural gas. And so when the market comes to set the price, usually the generator available to generate the next incremental megawatt of demand is a natural gas generator. And so what we had, a confluence of factors that started in December of 22 and went into January of 23, was some disruptions in the gas market, an extreme cold winter up in the Northwest. There was a few outages in the natural gas infrastructure that caused a price spike. And at the time, we were coming into that thinking, wow, we don't have much hydro generation kind of to offset those costs. That situation quickly changed, and we essentially went from a drought situation to making early releases because of the great information that we had from our hydrology department. That saved us not only a ton of water, but a lot of purchase power and fuel dollars to benefit our customers.
Okay, so kind of the perfect storm, if you will, of all of these factors at the same time, right? You've got natural gas prices that are on the rise, which otherwise would be way askew of what TID had budgeted for as far as that purchase power and fuel cost. But then you also have our hydrology team who's saying, hey, even though we have storage available in Don Pedro, we know that there's X times amount that is going to come into the reservoir, and we're going to at some point have to make releases. So why not start those now and allow us to generate hydropower using those releases and kind of offset some of the cost of purchasing the natural gas with what we're generating from hydropower. Do I kind of have that right?
Absolutely. And I'm it was a real opportunity to grow as an organization. I'd say historically we would fill and spill.
Okay.
Because of the tools that we have now, the collaboration between the hydrology department, trading and scheduling, power control, marketing is all synced up now, and I'm very proud of staff and the way that they all came together to manage that situation, and it was a real benefit to the district.
Absolutely. And I was going to comment on that as well. Like what a group effort to make that happen, and all for the benefit of our customers ultimately.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Okay. All right. So now there's a project taking place up at Don Pedro right now, and I'm going to kind of tease this a little bit because we will have an upcoming episode specifically about the Don Pedro Life Extension Project. But can you kind of give us a high-level view of what that is and what the impact to Don Pedro this Life Extension Project is going to be?
Sure. This is a generational project, and I would say Don Pedro's at a point where It's over 50 years old. It's roughly the same age as I am. It was commissioned in 1970, the same year I was born.
Young and spry, or
yeah, so starting to show a little gray hair, right? And so a lot of the infrastructure and the appurtenant structures around the facility needed to be upgraded. There's some outlet works and the power tunnel and things that you don't think about when it takes to make electricity and a hydropower facility to work. And so we started this project in earnest in 2011 in conjunction with the renewal of our FERC license.
Okay.
And so it gave us an opportunity to, since the license was going to be open, we had an opportunity to evaluate not only modernizing the facility, but upgrading the capacity. And so ultimately, long story short, after a robust analysis and sensitivities and all kinds of scenarios about where the facility fits into our portfolio, we decided to move forward with a capacity expansion that essentially takes those 3 55 megawatt units, and through the improvement in technology, the new efficient turbines, generators, rotors, shaft, everything is being changed at this facility. And ultimately, we're going to be generating more power with about as much water as we put through the facility now.
Okay, very cool. Well, like I said, we're gonna do a significant deep dive into all things related to the Life Extension Project on an upcoming episode. So I won't make you spend any more time there. But how would you say the role of Don Pedro has changed, either as TID operations have changed or as our customer load has changed?
Well, great question. I would say when Don Pedro first came online, it was more than enough to serve the demands of our customers fully from an energy standpoint. As the demands on our system have grown, our population has grown, our electricity demands have very much increased beyond that of Don Pedro. And so what used to be we used to be a completely carbon-free utility. We've outgrown Don Pedro, and that was another reason for the capacity expansion, is because it's becoming a lot more electric society, right? We're trying to electrify everything. The state's decarbonization goals really call for electric vehicles. They calls for electrifying buildings, and so the demands on our system have grown exponentially. Just as an example, I think we set a new BA peak record of 735 megawatts a couple years ago, and Don Pedro is, as I mentioned, 203 megawatts, and so even on our best day, we can serve that peak demand. Sure,
absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Don Pedro, our large hydro facility, but TID also has some small hydro facilities in our system as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about what constitutes a small hydro facility and what is included in the TID portfolio?
Sure. Small hydro, as I mentioned earlier, is anything under a 30 megawatt capacity. I'm going to date myself now, but I remember sitting in line for gas in the mid 70s with my mom. It was the era of the oil embargo.
Okay.
And gas was rationed. And at that time, the district was contemplating how are we going to hedge our energy, given that we may not have this oil to power other forms of energy, right? An analysis was done. An old colleague of TID, Roger Masuda, was around when these contracts were contemplated and the analysis was done, and he told me an interesting story about doing an analysis on a mainframe computer with dot matrix paper and boxes and boxes of analysis, which was fascinating for me. But the district, at the end of the day, decided that given what could happen in the future, to build some small hydro facilities. It was right around the time of 1978 where PURPA was passed, and that is the Public Utilities Regulatory Policy Act, which incentivized the building of low-impact generation for developers and made some incentives available to those developers that encouraged development of low-impact generation.
Okay.
We have 9 facilities. 4 of them are in the TID territory. One's on the river, and 3 of them are along our irrigation conveyance system. We own 2 with a sister agency, South San Joaquin Irrigation District, and there's 2 facilities there that are on the upstream and downstream of Woodward Reservoir.
Okay.
And then we also have 3 facilities located on the Merced Irrigation District system to the south of us.
Okay. So let's start with the facilities that are within the TID service territory. Can you tell us about those?
We have a 4 megawatt facility at LaGrange. It was built in 1924. It was part of the LaGrange Dam, which was built in 1893. It was our original water conveyance for irrigation facility, really the foundation of TID as a whole. And given that we have the ability to divert water at LaGrange, we thought it'd be good to build a powerhouse there, just given the amount of water that we can put through that system. We also have what's called Upper Dawson facility that's located on the Upper Main Canal in between LaGrange and Turlock Lake. That was built in 1983. And then we have the Turlock Lake facility, which is located at the outlet gates of Turlock Lake. And really that generates water as water is released for our irrigation customers. Turlock Lake serves as a holding facility for irrigation demand, helps us manage the changes in irrigation demand. But we also use that facility to maximize power generation in and out of those facilities.
Okay.
So we have Hickman located at Drop 9 of the main canal, just outside of town there. And Upper Dawson, Turlock Lake, and Hickman were all built around the same time, right after that the PURPA law was passed.
So those are the 4 small hydro facilities within our service territory. Now let's talk about the ones you mentioned that are kind of held in conjunction with some of our neighboring irrigation districts.
Sure. Yeah. To the north of us, we have Woodward Powerhouse and Frankenheimer Powerhouse. Those are both on the SSJID system, and they one is located on the upstream side of Woodward Reservoir. The other is located on the downstream side of Woodward Reservoir. We also have Parker, Fairfield, and Canal Creek. Those are all on the Merced Irrigation District system, and those were built in conjunction with Upper Dawson, Turlock Lake, and Hickman as part of the same bond issuance there in the early 80s.
Okay.
So all told, our small hydro portfolio is just over 26 megawatts, and that's all considered renewable.
Okay, very good. Now, with those facilities that are technically outside of TID's service territory, what's the relationship there? Who owns them? Who operates them? Where does that power go? That's
an interesting question. So the district, TID, issued the bonds to build all 9 facilities. Oh, I'm sorry, the eight facilities, because LaGrange was already built. So the district, TID, owns our internal facilities, which would be Dawson, Turlock Lake, and Hickman. The SSJID units are owned by SSJID. TID operates them and has first right to the power that generates them, that generates there. And it's the same arrangement with the outside facilities at Merced, of Parker, Fairfield, and Canal Creek.
Okay, very good. And so what do the roles then of these small hydros play for TID? You mentioned roughly 26 megawatts of generation. Is that influential in our portfolio, or where does the value come from?
Sure. And I will say the internal units have a different value than the external ones. The internal ones, which are Upper Dawson, Turlock Lake, and Hickman, are on our system. They directly serve our customers' electric demand, to whereas the ones outside of our system, essentially we sell into the Cal ISO wholesale market. Now, the value of all of these facilities is they all create renewable energy credits, and yes, they matter. As many utilities other than TID, we're also short renewable energy credits long term. We've got to get to 60%. Today we're around 30.
Okay.
We're actively adding to our portfolio, but every renewable energy credit helps as far as getting to the 60% standard, because we need to get to 60% in 2030 and stay there from a renewable standpoint all the way out to 2045. Once 2030 hits, the rest of the 40% that you need to serve with your customers will incrementally ramp up as far as the amount of carbon-free electricity that you need to provide.
Okay.
And so essentially our small hydro units help serve that 60% tranche, whereas Don Pedro helps serve that 40% tranche.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
One important benefit to our internal facilities too is every megawatt that they generate means one less megawatt that we have to generate at our thermal facilities, which means we either back down our natural gas, or that's capacity that's made available to the market to make sales to help offset our customers' rates.
Okay. So hydropower seems to be a win for TID. Has the district considered any other hydropower locations or adding any additional hydro to our system?
Great question. We are looking at other options as far as expanding our hydro. Over the years, we've had, I touched on it earlier, and I don't think I explained it well. There's this concept of micro hydro, which are extremely small turbines that are installed in a canal. We took a look at that technology. We felt it's not quite ready for prime time.
Okay.
We're also, I know I mentioned earlier, the pump storage project. It's probably a good time to talk a little bit about the Red Mountain Bar project. We originally, as part of our FERC license opening up at Don Pedro, we took the opportunity to look at the possibility of a pump storage facility. Red Mountain Bar is an area that is above Don Pedro that is a bowl and serves as a natural sort of upper reservoir that could be developed into an upper holding pond with all the facilities to pump water up and release it down to generate. That's an effort that we originally did the feasibility study in 2009. It's a big project. It's an ambitious project. There's a lot of lead times. It's 1,200 megawatts and $2.2 billion at the time.
At the time. We
recently asked for sort of a ballpark refresh, and it's roughly doubled.
Wow.
So it'd be $4 to $5 billion to develop that project now. But that's not to say that we're not going to look at it. We are definitely going to refresh the feasibility study on that, and with today's market and today's challenges, to see if it makes sense. That's something that we're thinking about in the future. I know on another front, under the leadership of GM Reimers, I know we're looking at other water storage facilities around not only in district, but out of district. And there could be some opportunities there to build some hydropower.
Okay.
And then related to hydropower, which really is sort of a separate subject, but kind of related in that it is generation associated with the body of water. We're also looking at the concept of floating solar.
Okay.
And we're actually we have designed a project to go over our new lateral 8 regulating reservoir, and we've applied for a grant and hope for good things.
Okay. All right. So again, as we've touched on multiple times during the TID Water and Power podcast, just innovative ideas. We're exploring all avenues.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're trying to leave no stone unturned in getting to where we need to go. Awesome.
So I want to go back a little bit and really kind of get into the value of our hydro portfolio. And value could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But let's start with just kind of the nuts and bolts cost value. When we're talking like dollars and cents, what does hydropower mean to the district?
Sure. At the highest level, conventional generation, you buy natural gas or coal, and that costs something, and you burn that commodity, and there's a cost generated. With a hydro facility, the fuel is provided by Mother Nature to the extent that it matches up with an opportunity to generate. So it's essentially the fuel is free.
Okay.
One other huge advantage to hydropower is it displaces those natural gas purchases that we have to make on our system. Because it's integrated and inside of our balancing authority, every megawatt hour that's generated displaces a megawatt hour that generates at our natural gas facilities. And like I mentioned earlier, frees up capacity to either we save the fuel and don't have to pay the greenhouse gas costs associated with that generation, or if the market supports it, we make that capacity available to the wholesale market and get paid and make a margin and hopefully help keep our rates low.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the example that you gave earlier with our hydrology team kind of being able to coach us through those big storms early in 2023, that also turned out to have a very cost-effective benefit to the district because of all that generation. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. It was kind of a watershed moment, not to
pun intended.
Pun intended, absolutely. Where because of the tools that we had available and the visibility to the water that we had coming into the system at much earlier times than we've ever had in the past, we were able to move generation from the future to the now, knowing that the fuel was coming. Mm-hmm. And so the net effect of that was roughly $20 to $30 million to the bottom line as far as our purchase power and fuel budget because of that flexibility that we realized because of the tools and the visibility that we had.
That's huge.
Huge, yes.
Okay, so clearly the dollars and cents are there.
It is, yes. It's a valuable resource that keeps getting more valuable. One other advantage to having that early visibility to the hydro fuel was, as you can imagine, during that time and in other times, we've seen this in the summer sometimes too, is that the state also was constrained power wise, and we were able to make generation available because of Don Pedro. We don't sell Don Pedro to the grid. That's generation that goes completely to the benefit of our customers. But every megawatt hour that was available at Don Pedro made megawatt hours available from our thermal fleet that we made available to the market and helped the state get through some challenging grid times.
That's important. Absolutely. Okay, so also part of the cost value is what it would cost to replace the generation with other resources. So if we didn't have Don Pedro generating hydro energy for us, what would that cost be in an average year?
That's a great question, and I'll caveat this by saying that market prices move all around all the time. I would categorize the value of Don Pedro and all of our hydro facilities right now at an all-time high, given the shortness of the market on the renewable energy credit side and the greenhouse gas side. And so I don't know that I'll take a guess and say roughly at least $50 million a year in average annual value. And that's really not doing it the justice, because if we didn't have that facility, we wouldn't be able to hit our ramps and do some of those ancillary services that the hydro facility provides to our grid. And that's following the deviations in demand and load, following those ramps, providing resource adequacy, which is capacity that goes against our demands on the system. It's just it's hard to quantify having to replace Don Pedro for those reasons.
Sure. All right. So we've talked a lot about renewables and carbon free. As far as the value of that with regard to TID's hydropower fleet, tell us a little bit more about that. Let's get into more of that.
Sure. So as the renewable requirements on load serving entities in California goes up, there's a little bit of a bottleneck happening right now in that the projects needed to serve that renewable demand, they can be built, but they can't be interconnected. And so the transmission is very much lagging the generation or the potential generation to be built to satisfy all the renewable demands of all the load serving entities. And so what it's causing is a little bit of a renewables crunch. And so short-term RECs, renewable energy credits, costs have gone up close to tenfold.
Wow.
In the last 10 years. And we don't expect that to straighten out until the end of the decade. On the greenhouse gas side, credits historically, so that's a program, cap and trade started in 2012, and the state mindfully went into it with a soft launch and kept the cost down and made plenty of credits available. As every year that goes by with the cap and trade, though, the market gets a little bit shorter and the costs go up a little bit more. And so greenhouse gas credits started in the neighborhood of around $10 a metric ton, and today are in excess of $40 a metric ton. And what that translates to at our thermal facilities is almost $20 a megawatt hour.
Wow. Okay. So aside from cost value, what other value does hydropower offer?
There's also operational flexibility that our hydro facilities provide, especially at Don Pedro, when irrigation demand goes up during the summer, or when energy demand typically goes up, we can ramp that facility up to meet those demands. And we're able to make releases and generate to better match our load curve. And that facility is again, very flexible. It can be base load, which means you can set it at a certain amount and it just runs flat out at the same megawatts 24/7, or you can shape it to match the demands in our system. And like I mentioned earlier, it's the fastest moving generator that we have on our system, and it really serves a vital purpose in the power control center and our operations folks following the demand of our customers and keeping them reliable and the lights on. Speaking of keeping the lights on, Don Pedro Unit 2 serves as our black start unit, which is essentially, if we lose power to Don Pedro and we can't generate, or we have to, if God forbid we go through an outage and we have to turn the lights off, Don Pedro Unit 2 is considered a black start unit. So that means that we can start generating without the advantage of having power to start that generating unit.
Wow.
And so it's essential to our balancing area function that we have a unit like that that's able to sync to the grid without power.
Crazy.
And
Okay.
And at that point, it would serve as the beginning of rebuilding our system and turning the lights on.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. All right. What about hydropower's value from a capacity standpoint?
Great question. And so what's great about hydro from a capacity standpoint is that as long as the fuel is there, you get credit from a capacity standpoint very close to the max capacity because we manage the fuel source behind it in a manner that makes it available to generate at the top of its capability. Now, we may not be able to do that very long. Mm-hmm. We might be limited in maxing out our generation, but because of fish flows or storage or market or what have you, but having the ability to generate at its max means that we get credit for the max of that capacity value. Unlike other intermittent resources like wind and solar, where the capacity value is essentially calculated as a function of what you can depend on at peak demand. And as we've seen proliferate throughout the years, the peak demand doesn't necessarily match up with wind or solar.
Sure.
And so the capacity value, or what's called NQC, which stands for net qualifying capacity, those values are going down. And with every incremental megawatt of solar, that capacity continues to go down because it just exacerbates the problem because there's more capacity when you don't need it and less when you do.
Sure. And I guess I should take a step back. Why is capacity important? Why is that something that we monitor and keep track of?
Great question. And that really is sort of the linchpin problem in the West right now. Capacity is important because it ensures that at the very peak demand, that we'll be able to keep the lights on.
Okay.
We have an energy rich grid. We have a lot of energy on the system when we don't need it. In the middle of the afternoon, when I first came onto TID in 2006, our peak demand was right around 4:00. Now, because of all the solar that's not only on our system but on the grid as a whole, that peak demand happens after the solar kind of fades out, and all that latent demand comes onto the system, and we have what's called the duck curve. And so the 6:00 through 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening those are the challenging hours now.
Okay. That's when everybody's home, they're turning on their appliances, AC goes up, all
Correct.
of those things. Okay. And so the capacity factors into us being able to provide for that demand peak whenever it happens, but we know that ours kind of happens in that early evening time, but having the capacity to provide for that.
Correct. And like I mentioned earlier, hydro's usually available to generate that max capacity at the max demand.
Okay. So that's capacity kind of on a macro scale. But let's talk about it on a little bit more of a granular level and how we really take advantage of that. And I think this is where our trading and scheduling and your roots in trading and scheduling come into play.
Sure. So what we get in the trading and scheduling area is a forecast of irrigation demand, as well as a whole bunch of market information and storage information at Turlock Lake. And what that group does is optimize the Don Pedro capacity. So usually what they'll do is they'll schedule the Don Pedro generation to kind of coincide with the most valuable hours at the highest demand. We're constrained somewhat to the limitations on our main canal. We can't ramp the facility to its full capacity because of the limitations at the main canal.
Because that water's got to go somewhere.
The limitations on the canal prevent us from moving from all the way to the bottom to all the way to the top. We're limited in the amount of hourly changes that we can make in the canal because that is that is the core of our irrigation diversion point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know we're looking at, as a district, one of our larger generational type project is upgrading the upper main to where we can take full advantage of the new capacity that we're building at Don Pedro. And as regional markets extend and become more developed, that's going to become a lot more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back to trading and scheduling, they'll make a plan for the day. They can shape it to the demands of our customers, and they can really, because of the operational flexibility that we have, not only at Don Pedro but in some of our mini hydro facilities, we can help maximize that potential to better serve our customers.
All right. So you've mentioned earlier that there's obviously a lot of hydro generation up in the Northwest. TID certainly has the option to import some of that power. Why is it important to have hydropower here in our own balancing authority, in our own territory?
Great question. And really that gets back to local control and taking charge of our customers' reliability and providing reliable, affordable service for our customers. Many of us can remember the rolling blackouts that happened in 2000 and 2001. The TID board at the time was very clairvoyant and decided to take matters into our own hands and build the resources to become a balancing authority to really eliminate or mitigate that possibility that our customers would be subject to grid conditions and emergencies that are essentially a function of the state's poor planning.
Okay. So we are our own balancing authority, and having that local asset and the local control over that asset is just another benefit to our planning and how we schedule our operations.
It is. And like I said, that BA move was critical. We're not subject to the California Independent System Operator. We're not regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. Yes, we don't have full autonomy.
Sure.
We have regulatory bodies that we answer to, but essentially that local control, that local governance that comes with being a special district and a BA is extremely important to fulfilling our mission.
Okay.
One other local advantage of having not only Don Pedro but our mini hydro facilities is that these are facilities that are staffed by local people specific to the Don Pedro project. Our staff actually lives on site and is part of the community up there at Don Pedro.
That definitely makes it a more personal responsibility as well.
Correct.
Very good. All right, so let's take a look into the future. We've talked a little bit about the Don Pedro Life Extension Project, and we'll hear more about that in a future episode. That's obviously something that we're doing to make sure our facilities can continue to provide value, even 50 years into the future. What else do you see in the future of TID's hydro fleet?
Yes, along those same lines, the small hydro, the mini hydro facilities, those 9 facilities that I touched on earlier, they're starting to age out, and they're getting to a point where we're starting to evaluate the value of those facilities and making capital improvements to them to also set those facilities up for the next 40, 50 years. So we'll be seeing a feasibility come out here real soon on the small hydros about that will really delineate the investments that we need to make them reliable resources for the district for some time to come. I touched earlier on the Upper Main Canal. That is really, so I view it as we're building a Rolls Royce up there at Don Pedro, and we have We have a Toyota Corolla Governor as far as an upper main, and I know some others in the district may take offense to that, and I don't mean any offense at all. That upper main is the absolute essential artery to what we do. But to the extent that we have all this new capacity at Don Pedro right around the end of the decade, it's going to be critical to take a hard look at that upper main canal improvement to remove some of those constraints.
Sure. Well, and our irrigation system is 100 years old. It was built in a time and place that served more than served the needs that we had at that time. But now, as we've grown, there are upgrades that need to be made to all parts of the system. So hopefully someday the upper main will be as Rolls Royce as Don Pedro. All right. Anything else that we should look forward to with regard to TID's hydropower assets or the future of that resource?
Nothing comes to mind right now. I really enjoyed being here and talking with you today about our hydropower portfolio and the value that it has to the district.
Well, and I think you have very clearly illustrated that value. So we appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thank you for tuning in to the TID Water and Power Podcast. You can find TID on Facebook at facebook.com/TurlockID, on Instagram and Twitter at TurlockID, and on LinkedIn as the Turlock Irrigation District. I'm your host, Constance Anderson. We'll see you again next time.